Hi, welcome to this video, and in this video I'd like us to talk about a very pertinent topic which is not often addressed. Should believers borrow? Well, technically I'm doing most of the talking right now, you're just listening, but of course feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below. There is a general association of negativity with the concept of borrowing, especially in the Christian milieu. As a matter of fact, many preachers actually do preach that as a believer, you are not to borrow, you are to be a lender. And that's true. That is in scriptures, and the scriptures teaches that we shall be lenders and not borrowers. So the question then is, what exactly is wrong about borrowing, if at all there is anything? To properly address this, we need to understand exactly the concept of borrowing. Like a character in the book The Richest Man in Babylon said, there is more to borrowing and lending than the exchanging of money from one hand to another. So that said, then I'm going to tell you, to answer this question, there are two categories, if you can put it that way, of borrowing. And one category is acceptable and the other one not so much, and perhaps that's exactly the one which the Bible talks about. So quickly, let's dive into this category. So the first category is the positive type of borrowing, and basically this type of borrowing is when you are borrowing for productivity, you are borrowing for investment, you are borrowing so that you can create more value out of that money. This is acceptable. Take for example, say you have a project you're executing and you have maybe poured in, say, $2.5 million already inside, and then you need maybe another $500,000 to complete the project, and you have a buyer who is ready to take the project at $5 million. So what do? Do you lose $2 million you're supposed to make as profit from that buyer by waiting to find $500,000 maybe from your next 3 months pay or next month's pay, whereas you can just borrow from someone, complete the project, sell it, and you refund them? So that kind of borrowing is borrowing for productivity, so it's kind of acceptable. And now there are two criteria to positive type of borrowing that you need to understand. First, when you're borrowing the right way, you are not borrowing to consume, you're borrowing to invest, you're borrowing to produce. So basically, number one, you're borrowing to buy time. So if you have raised $2.5 million, it means that $500,000 is not a problem for you. It just happens to be that there is a time constraint. Of course, as children of God, we should be led by the Spirit of God. God has several ways of doing and leading us or meeting our needs. But the point here is, if you're led in that situation, borrowing is not a problem, because you're basically just borrowing to buy time. If you're able to raise $2.5 million, it means that in a month or two, 500 grand shouldn't be a problem for you. And the second point, when you're borrowing the right way, you never borrow what is beyond your existing assets. Okay, so basically the point says that if you want to borrow something, it means you should already have assets in place worth what you're borrowing, so that in the worst case of scenarios, even if you're unable to pay back, your things which you have, which are of value equivalent or more than the debt, can be liquidated to solve the debt. The reason is because, of course, the problem with borrowing, like scripture says, is that the borrower is slave to the lender. So what you're trying to avoid when you're doing the positive type of borrowing is to respect scriptures, to see that you don't become a slave to the lender. One, by assuring that you're just gaining time, meaning that it's not something that is more than you. It just happens that the timing may be a little bit challenging for you, so you're buying time. And two, you already have existing assets worth the debt or more, so that at the end of the day, whatever goes wrong, you can just liquidate your asset, pay the debt, and you remain a free man. And so you never become a slave to your lender. Now, the second category of borrowing, which you should absolutely avoid, basically that's exactly what the scripture is talking about when it says you shall not be borrowers but you shall be lenders, is, of course, as you have guessed, the direct opposite of what we have just seen. Number one, you're not borrowing to invest or to produce, you're borrowing to consume. And that's basically what African countries are doing, and third world nations, even my country, and sadly so. You can never build or develop an economy or develop your life is your economy, with borrowed funds which you're borrowing to consume. Okay, so borrowing to consume is the negative and bad type of borrowing which you should avoid absolutely. Why? Because poverty, like Dr. Miles Monroe says, is not the lack of money. Poverty is the lack of productivity. So you can't have a poverty problem and you're going to borrow money, to come and fill the poverty problem, because the solution is not money, because that money would run out. The solution is productivity. So become productive. Like the example we saw in the other category, the person is productive. They just ran out of funds to complete their productivity. So borrowing to consume is a very, very wrong and dangerous kind of borrowing. And of course, the second one, direct opposite, when you are borrowing beyond what you have existing assets and values to cover, you're going to end up a slave. Basically, because your assets cannot compensate for the debt in the worst case of scenario. So eventually, who compensates for the debt? You. That's why you end up a slave to the lender. And that's exactly what the Bible tries to warn us against. So whatever you do, don't borrow to consume. Don't borrow beyond your capacity. And the proof of your current capacity is the value of all what you have access or that you're in possession of. So that's it. If you're familiar with scriptures like the story of Elisha and the widow woman with the child, and she had debts to pay, and so Elisha the prophet tells her, go home, get the containers you have, and borrow some containers from your neighbor. So there the prophet of God is actually telling her to borrow. For those of you who still think your mind is closed, no borrowing of any sort. Well, the prophet did ask her to borrow containers so that she can fill them with oil and sell the oil, and she can even pay for the containers or even buy all the containers she needs. So she's borrowing for investment. Well, you may say she was borrowing containers, she was not borrowing money. Does it really matter? Whatever you're borrowing, you're borrowing. Whether you're borrowing money, clothes, dresses, shoes. Well, ladies, I'm sorry, but borrowing is borrowing, okay? So that's the point. That's our time in this video. I hope you've been blessed. I am Bodas Djoumessi from Wisdom for Dominion. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I want to say a big thank you to all our patrons. Thank you for supporting our work. You too can support our channel. Check the link to our Patreon page in the video description below. Remember, we are kingdom citizens, so we walk by kingdom principles. Well, look at this. You know what to do. Link in the description below. So thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.